time in the Q&A corner. I've got the pleasure of joining Julia Pallé, Formula E Senior Sustainability Consultant, with me this morning. Thank you for joining me, Julia. Um, so, last time we spoke, it was at the start of season 5, a few months ago, and we talked about some of the changes that you were looking at for the season, particularly with the new cars. In your role as a senior sustainability consultant, how would you kind of characterize the season for yourself? How have things changed, and what have been your main challenges?
It's probably. Can you hear me? Yes, here we go. Yeah, it's probably been the more interesting season, I must say, because we are in the first year that is like post ISO 201 certification. So we've implemented so many new programs that we're rolling out. The management and the staff is now super used to it. I cannot say that we have no challenges, but I'm kind of like in a dream situation at the moment, so I'm enjoying it.
Just for the audience, can we talk about a little bit about ISO 201 and why it's an important standard for events to have if they want to be truly sustainable?
Well, it's basically about when you're an event and that as an organization you promote sustainability, you really want to walk the talk and make sure that you align into what you are, what you're producing, and what you're kind of like fighting for as a higher purpose. So it enables you to really align and reconcile these two. So for me, it's only been a benefit, really.
What were the kind of practical steps you went through in order to kind of implement the standard?
Well, you go through a strategic and contextual analysis to grow your key issues as a business that then you kind of like confront your entire ecosystem to make sure that everyone is happy that it's your key issues. And then you turn these key issues as your key and priority objective targets and action plan, really.
You talked on the stage, and everyone talked on the stage about the business case for sustainability. I know it's early days when we talk about ISO 201. I know it's the first season, but have you seen any kind of benefit in terms of a business or commercial case for implementing it yet, or is it too soon to discuss that?
Well, the thing is that sustainability has always been kind of like the USP of Formula E, even like from a partner's perspective. So I think they feel like even more reassured that like we are always at the forefront and we're always kind of like pushing ourselves to go higher and like to be more credible and legitimate. But I must say that it's something that like they kind of like they have a full trust in us in making sure that like we do handle things in the better way possible.
One of the things I asked Anne Cecile, and I think both your sports, sailing and Formula E, are very intrinsically linked to sustainability. And there'll be other sports that aren't so, it's not such an obvious link. When you look at things like ISO 2012 and incorporating the SDGs, for example, what kind of advice would you give to another sports organisation, perhaps looking at this, but not being sure about how to implement these things?
Well, you need, I agree, a certain level of maturity in your sustainability approach. You need to start with the basis, and having already started to implement a sustainable management system or an environmental management system would definitely help. Probably more with the culture of your organization rather than the pure exercise itself. So it's having your people that are ready to get on board, because the most difficult is to involve the department and make it to life, because it can be like a series of papers and documentations without bringing it to life from the event perspective.
You spoke on stage about being the troublemaker in the first year or so at Formula E, but then previous to that, you mentioned that people are now joining because of the sustainability credentials of the organisation. So that seems like a bit of a shift in terms of people's mentalities. And when we talk about the business case, we also talk about employee attraction and retention. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you engage with your colleagues within the organisation?
Yes, so it was very interesting because I've always had the support of the top management that's, understood the importance, that saw the importance, and that was trusting me. But the rest of my colleagues were really seeing what we were doing as something a bit scary. They would like, the marketing and communications were like, how do we talk about sustainability? Please help us. Like, we don't want to touch on these. And I was like, but it's nothing like, it's not a rocket science. You just need to, well, that's what it is. And in the end, it's really about like involving them and like trying to put ourselves, first of all, in their shoes and trying to understand like in which way they are impacted by what we do, but also getting them to contribute so that they understand really what we're doing, but also they are kind of like they're the own actors so that they can contribute like by their expertise, because everyone has a different expertise, into the sustainability practices of the business, really.
Do you engage them on kind of a micro level for the good of their career, being involved in something that's very sustainable, very responsible, or sort of on a macro level, saving the planet and being very sustainable in that way?
I would say both. For me, I mean, it depends really the temper and the people. I think most and more we are quite a young organization, so most and more people are really motivated by the higher purpose. But also on the very pragmatic level, it's also about being more innovative, like, and being more efficient in your work.
Just finally, there'll be a number of sports organisations in the room who are obviously not as mature in terms of sustainability from Formula E. In my earlier panel, Anne Cecile said, "Don't worry about getting the house in order. State your intentions, and then worry about getting your house in order as you go along." What's your view on that? What's your position on that kind of mentality?
Well, for us, because sustainability in motorsport is already quite like unusual, I really wanted to build a very strong CSR approach, as I said already on stage before we were starting to go into the event side of the story. So, I mean, getting the house in order was my priority at the beginning, but also I must say because everything was so new that we needed to, I mean, to have something very tangible and very reassuring. I mean, both for us as a business and both for the partners, something that they would easily relate to. And then as we were going and as I mean things were progressing again, both for the business and for the sustainability approach, really moving on, we've been able to, I mean, be a bit more innovative and a bit more like forward thinking in what we were doing.
Before we let Julia go, do we have any questions from the audience? Sure, go ahead.
Same quick question. I'm wondering how you came about existing in your organization. Did you come first, or did the function exist first? And who was sponsoring this idea internally?
So I arrived at the beginning of the championship, but so the first race was in September 2014, and I started working in February, so 6 months more or less before. So it was early. I arrived with a blank page and like a list of people that were just like ready to throw me papers and questions and so on. And it was quite daunting, I must say, at the beginning. But I arrived under the impulsion of the CEO that knew that it was so central, that it was the USP of the championship. So we needed someone that was like understanding it and that was able to kind of like, I mean, carry the championship also from that perspective, having the right, again, in place the CSR, but also the messaging for the business. So it was, yes, it was quite an adventure, I must say.
You had leadership support to be the troublemaker in the organization.
Exactly. The CEO was the one that hired me.
Well, we're coming to the end of the season. There's only a few more races left. What were your kind of key highlights for this season? What are the main milestones you could kind of point to for season 5?
Well, we've been very happy with the plastic reduction initiative that we've introduced this season. So basically, we worked with Blue Water, and thanks again to Anne Cecile because it's a good tip that she gave me. And we introduced reusable water pouches for all the public and reusable bottles for all our VIPs and reusable bottles for our staff. So we targeted the different like publics that we wanted to, I mean, to test this on, and because it worked really well. The number of like bottles that we saved is like huge, humongous. It's like tens of thousands of like bottles of water that would be single used and thrown away. That's a program that we will develop. On a more social aspect, the Girls on Track program that I mentioned on the stage to try and promote, I mean, female into motorsport and then female drivers in the key positions is also something that I'm very proud of.
And season 6, can we expect anything new? Have you started planning yet?
I really want to work on science-based targets in season 6. That's going to be my, I mean, one of my kind of like key projects, very new for the championship. I think it's very important to align our key objectives onto this like overall, I mean, achievement. That's like we need to row in the same direction, but like make sure that we really do our part within the, I mean, the very short time frame that we have.
Science-based targets is seen as a real sign of leadership if you adopt science-based targets. Just very briefly before you go, for our audience who don't know what science-based targets are, can you kind of give a quick overview of what they are and how you could try to achieve that?
Yes, so it's basically a sort of protocol that you apply to your key business objectives and the key areas that you work on as a business to make sure that you would, not emit more than the target of like staying underneath the 1.5 degrees of global warming as the planet needs if we want to sustain on it. And that's taking a sort of kind of like sectorial approach on, well, for example, for your freight, what can you do, how much do you need to reduce and so on. So that's quite a complex approach, but I feel that like we're ready as a business, and it's also coming to an interesting point with it will be the year before we start renewing again our ISO certification, surveillance and so on. So that's probably like the good moment to try and do it so that then we can embed into the new ISO cycle.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julia. Everyone give a quick round of applause for Julia Pallé and thank her for her time today. Thank you, Julia. And if you're interested in the sustainability topic more, we'll have 2 more speakers, so please stick around.